The story begins on a quiet evening in Los Angeles. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. Sandra Bullock sat alone in her home, her thoughts heavy, her heart burdened with memories she could not shake. The world knew her as a strong actress, a woman who carried herself with grace and laughter, but in that moment she felt small, fragile, and almost invisible. She held a photograph in her hands. It was from the set of a film years ago, where she had worked side by side with Keanu Reeves. People had often spoken about their bond, the warmth in their eyes when they looked at each other, the respect that seemed deeper than simple friendship. Yet Sandra had kept most of her emotions hidden, unsure if sharing them would ruin what they already had. That evening, tears rolled down her face without warning. She had been carrying so many struggles, loneliness, pressure, and the pain of losing people she once relied on. The weight felt unbearable, and she whispered softly to herself, "I wish someone truly understood me." Just then, her phone buzzed. It was a simple message from Keanu. "Thinking of you. Hope you're okay." The words were ordinary, but for Sandra, they felt like a lifeline. She hesitated, then replied with trembling hands, "Not really. Today has been hard." Minutes later, there was a knock on her door. She froze, confused. When she opened it, there stood Keanu Reeves, quiet, calm, wearing his usual modest clothes. No cameras, no audience, just him. His eyes held the same kindness she remembered from years ago. "I was nearby," he said softly. "I thought maybe you shouldn't be alone right now." Those words broke the wall she had built around her heart. She tried to smile, but instead tears rushed out faster. She turned her face away, embarrassed. But Keanu gently reached out, not with dramatic gestures, but with quiet humanity. He handed her a tissue, then carefully wiped one of her tears with his hand. "Don't hide," he whispered. "Tears don't make you weak. They show you've carried more than most people will ever know." Sandra's chest shook as she tried to speak, but no words came out. She felt seen, not as a Hollywood star, not as a woman expected to be perfect, but as a human being who was hurting. They sat together in silence for a while. Keanu didn't push her to explain. He didn't ask for details. He simply stayed present, listening to her quiet sobs and breathing beside her. The room, once filled with loneliness, began to feel lighter. After a long pause, Sandra finally said, "Keanu, do you ever feel like people only see parts of you but never all of you?" He looked down, his expression thoughtful, and then nodded. "Every day. But I've learned something. When even one person sees the real you, it makes carrying the unseen parts a little easier." That moment hit Sandra deeply. It wasn't advice from a guru. It wasn't a line from a film. It was truth spoken by someone who had also known pain, who had lost, who had learned to walk through life quietly, yet with strength. She leaned back against the couch, her tears slowing, and whispered, "Thank you for coming." Keanu smiled faintly, almost shyly. "I didn't come to fix anything. I came because sometimes the kindest thing you can do is just sit beside someone when they feel alone." And in that simple act, a powerful truth emerged. Respect is not in grand gestures. Kindness is not in loud words. Resilience is not in hiding pain. And humility is not in being perfect. It is in showing up for someone when they least expect it. Outside, the city lights began to glow, unaware of the quiet moment inside that small room. But for Sandra, it felt like the first time in a long time that her heart could breathe again. And for Keanu, it was just another reminder that kindness, no matter how small, has the power to heal wounds unseen by the world. Ending line. The night after Keanu visited, Sandra couldn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, her mind replaying the quiet moment again and again, how he showed up without judgment, how he simply stayed, how he wiped away her tears as if he had been doing it his whole life. It was strange, she thought, how a single act of kindness could shift the weight of an entire day. The next morning, she sat by her window, sipping coffee, still feeling the echo of his presence. Something inside her whispered that maybe this wasn't just a small visit. Maybe this was the beginning of a deeper journey, one that neither of them had expected. While she tried to shake off her thoughts, her phone buzzed again. It was Keanu. His message was short. "Would you like to take a walk today?" Sandra stared at the words. Part of her wanted to say no, to retreat into the comfort of her home and her guarded walls. But another part, the part that had felt truly seen the night before, pushed her to say yes. She typed back, "Okay, where?" Minutes later, another message appeared. "There's a small park near your street. Nothing fancy. I'll meet you there." By the time she arrived, Keanu was already sitting on a bench, wearing a simple jacket and a cap, blending in like any ordinary man. No one paid attention to him, no one stopped to ask for photos. It was as if he carried an invisible shield of humility that allowed him to exist quietly in a noisy world. "You came," he said with a soft smile as she approached. "You asked," she replied, her voice gentle, but inside her heart beat faster than usual. They began to walk along the path, surrounded by tall trees swaying in the morning breeze. The world felt slower there, calmer, as if time had chosen to pause for them. Keanu spoke first. "You know, people think they need to say the right words when someone's hurting. But sometimes silence does more than words ever can." Sandra looked at him carefully. "Is that why you didn't ask me anything last night?" He nodded. "Because pain isn't always ready to explain itself. Sometimes it just needs space to exist." His words sank into her like water into dry soil. She had always been the one to comfort others, to carry herself with strength, to play the role the world expected. But Keanu's presence gave her permission to be vulnerable, to stop pretending, even if just for a little while. They walked in silence for a few minutes, the sound of leaves crunching beneath their feet filling the air. Then, without warning, Sandra stopped. "Keanu," she whispered, her voice trembling, "what do you do when the world thinks you're strong, but inside you feel like you're breaking?" He turned to her, his eyes calm yet filled with unspoken stories. "I let it break," he said quietly, "because only when it breaks can it rebuild into something stronger. Pain changes shape, but it doesn't have to destroy us. It can teach us." Sandra's throat tightened. She wanted to ask how he knew so much about pain, but she didn't need to. His eyes carried the weight of loss, resilience, and countless unspoken battles. She knew his life hadn't been easy, yet he carried himself with a grace that inspired millions. "And what if you feel like you can't rebuild?" she asked softly. Keanu's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Then you don't rebuild alone. You let someone sit with you in the ruins until you're ready." The words pierced her heart, and without realizing it, tears filled her eyes again. She turned away, embarrassed, but Keanu noticed. He gently handed her his handkerchief. The same simple gesture from the night before. "Don't hide this time," he said kindly. Her hands trembled as she took it, and for a moment she felt like a child again. Fragile, in need of comfort, yet safe in his presence. As they continued walking, something unexpected happened. A small child holding a broken kite ran toward them, tears streaming down his face. His mother was behind him, calling his name, but the boy was too focused on the torn kite to listen. Without hesitation, Keanu bent down, meeting the boy at eye level. "What happened?" he asked gently. "It broke," the boy sniffled, holding up the pieces. Keanu smiled softly. "Sometimes things break, but that doesn't mean we stop flying them. Want me to help fix it?" The boy nodded eagerly, his tears slowing. Keanu sat on the grass, carefully tying the strings together, patching the fragile paper with his steady hands. Sandra watched in silence, her heart swelling at the sight. Here was a man who could be anywhere, doing anything, yet he chose to kneel on the ground for a child he didn't know. When the kite was ready, Keanu handed it back. "Try again," he said with a smile. The boy ran off, laughter replacing his tears, and his mother mouthed a quiet thank you before following him. Sandra's eyes filled again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was from something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. Keanu shrugged lightly. "Maybe not, but kindness is never wasted." His words hung in the air, wrapping around her like a warm blanket. They continued their walk, and Sandra realized something. Life had given her many moments of success, fame, and applause. But it was in this quiet park, with Keanu beside her, that she felt something rarer than all of that combined. Peace, yet deep inside, she also felt a question building, one she wasn't sure she was brave enough to ask. Was this only kindness, or was there something more waiting beneath it all? The days that followed felt different for Sandra. She noticed the silence in her home was not as heavy as before. The photograph she once held with tears no longer carried the same weight. Instead, it reminded her of something gentle, how Keanu had shown up when no one else did, how he had turned her sorrow into a moment of connection. But as her heart grew lighter, another kind of storm was quietly forming outside. The media had caught whispers of them being seen together at the park. Photos surfaced of Keanu bending down to fix the little boy's kite, with Sandra standing nearby, wiping her eyes. The internet exploded with speculation. Some headlines praised the kindness, while others twisted it into gossip, painting a story neither of them wanted told. Sandra sat in her living room, scrolling through the articles with growing unease. Comments filled the pages, some full of love, others cruel, questioning her vulnerability and his intentions. The world, as always, wanted to claim their story. Her phone buzzed. It was Keanu calling. "Don't read too much of it," he said calmly as soon as she answered, as if he already knew what she was doing. "They're saying things that aren't true," Sandra whispered, her voice cracking. "They make it look like we're just another headline." There was silence on the other end, but not the kind that made her feel alone. It was the silence of someone choosing words carefully. "People will always create their own stories," Keanu finally said. "But what matters is the story we choose to live. Do you trust me?" His question lingered in the air. Sandra closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "Yes, I do. Then let's not let them decide who we are." His words, simple yet steady, struck something inside her. She realized he wasn't just comforting her, he was teaching her resilience in a way she had forgotten. She had spent so long trying to control how people saw her, but Keanu was reminding her that respect isn't won by pleasing others, but by standing firm in your truth. A few days later, Sandra agreed to meet Keanu again, this time in a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of the city. They sat across from each other, unnoticed by most, sipping coffee and sharing quiet laughter. But beneath the laughter, Sandra carried questions she couldn't keep inside anymore. "Keanu?" she began softly, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "Why do you keep showing up for me like this? You don't owe me anything." He looked at her with those steady eyes, the ones that always seemed to hold more than they revealed. "Because someone once showed up for me when I thought I had nothing left. I never forgot how that felt. Maybe this is my way of passing it forward?" His answer left her stunned. She wanted to ask who that person was, what they had done, what pain he was carrying, but she stopped herself. Instead, she leaned back, watching him sip his coffee like it was the simplest thing in the world. Then came an unexpected interruption. An elderly woman walked into the cafe, struggling with her walking stick. Without hesitation, Keanu stood up, pulled out a chair for her, and even carried her tray to the table. The woman looked at him, surprised, and whispered, "You remind me of my late son." Keanu only smiled softly and replied, "Then maybe for a moment, I can be that for you." Sandra's chest tightened. It wasn't just that he was kind. It was the way he gave himself fully to the moment, whether with a child, an old woman, or a friend in tears. He didn't see people as interruptions. He saw them as reminders that every life carried meaning. After the woman settled, Sandra whispered, "How do you do it? How do you stay so grounded in a world that tries to tear you apart?" Keanu paused, his gaze fixed on the steam rising from his cup. "I remind myself that fame doesn't make me more human, and pain doesn't make me less. In the end, we're all just walking each other home." His words wrapped around her like a truth she had been waiting her whole life to hear. Later that night, when Sandra returned home, she found herself unable to stop thinking about everything. His words, his kindness, the way the elderly woman's eyes softened when he helped her. But more than that, she thought about how he carried his pain quietly, without bitterness, turning it into compassion for others. It was then she realized something important. The world might see him as an untouchable star, but she had seen the man behind the screen, the man who chose kindness even when no one was watching, and deep down, she wondered if perhaps her own healing wasn't just about her tears being wiped away. Maybe it was about learning to walk alongside someone who knew that brokenness could also be beautiful. But as she closed her eyes that night, one thought stayed with her. What if the world wasn't ready to let them keep this quiet? What if the storm outside grew louder than the peace they were building together? The storm outside did grow louder. Within a week, magazines printed bold covers of Sandra and Keanu. Photos of them walking in the park, sitting in the cafe, even helping the little boy with the kite, were plastered everywhere. Hashtags trended online, some celebrating their bond, others spinning cruel stories. It was no longer just whispers. It had become a roar. Sandra sat on her couch one evening, scrolling through the endless chatter. Her phone was flooded with messages, some from friends asking if the rumors were true, others from journalists demanding statements. The noise pressed against her chest like a weight she couldn't shake off. A sudden knock on her door startled her. When she opened it, Keanu was standing there, calm as always, holding a small paper bag. "I brought dinner," he said softly. Sandra forced a weak smile. "You always know when to show up." "I don't know," he replied, stepping inside. "I just follow the silence. When it feels heavy, I try to lighten it." They sat down at her kitchen table, unpacking simple takeout containers. No glamorous meal, no fine dining, just noodles and spring rolls. The ordinariness of it made Sandra laugh, a sound she hadn't felt in days, but her laughter faded when she noticed the worry in Keanu's eyes. "You've seen it, haven't you? All the things they're saying about us?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. Doesn't it bother you?" she asked, her voice cracking. "They twist everything. They don't see kindness. They see scandal." Keanu leaned back, his expression thoughtful. "It bothers me that it hurts you. But the rest, no. Because truth doesn't change just because people tell a louder lie." His calmness amazed her. He wasn't dismissing the pain, but he wasn't letting it control him either. "How do you do that?" she whispered. "How do you stay so steady when the world keeps trying to shake you?" He gave a faint smile. "Because I've already been shaken. When you've lost enough, when you've faced enough storms, you learn not to fight the noise. You just keep walking through it until it passes." Sandra felt tears building again, but this time, they were mixed with something else: admiration, respect, even hope. After dinner, they sat on the balcony. The city lights twinkled below, but up there, the world felt quiet. Sandra finally let the words slip out. "Keanu, do you ever regret being kind? I mean, doesn't it leave you vulnerable?" "People use it, people misunderstand it." He thought for a long moment before answering. "Sometimes kindness hurts. Sometimes it's misunderstood. But I'd rather be hurt for being kind than safe for being cold. The world has enough coldness already." His words sank deep into her, filling spaces she didn't even realize were empty. Just then, her phone buzzed again. It was her manager. She hesitated, then answered. The voice on the other end was sharp, urgent. "Sandra, the press is everywhere. They're demanding a statement about you and Keanu. We can't keep silent much longer. If you don't say something, they'll write the story for you." Sandra's hand trembled as she hung up. She looked at Keanu, her eyes filled with fear. "What do we do?" He didn't rush to answer. Instead, he reached out and gently held her hand, his touch steady and reassuring. "We do what feels right," he said. "Not what feels loud." Before she could respond, a sudden sound rose from the street below. She stepped to the balcony railing and froze. Cameras flashed from every angle. Paparazzi had found them. Shouts echoed through the night. "Keanu! Sandra, are you together?" "Is it true?" Her heart pounded. Panic surged. She turned to Keanu, but he remained calm, as if he had expected this moment all along. "They won't stop," she whispered. "They'll never let this go." Keanu stepped closer, his voice firm yet gentle. "Then let's not run from it. Let's face it together. Not as stars. Not as headlines, just as people." The cameras continued flashing, their shouts louder, but on that balcony, something shifted. Sandra realized she wasn't alone anymore. She wasn't carrying the weight by herself. Keanu wasn't just standing beside her. He was sharing the burden. And in that moment, with the chaos of the world below and the quiet strength of his hand in hers, she understood something. The world could create its stories, twist its headlines, chase them with flashes of light. But the truth was here, in the silence between them, in the respect, in the kindness, in the resilience they shared. Yet deep inside, she also knew this was only the beginning. Storms rarely end quickly. Some grow darker before the light returns, and something told her that their greatest test was still waiting ahead. The following week tested everything. Sandra and Keanu could no longer step outside without feeling the eyes of the world on them. Wherever they went, cameras followed. Even the simplest gestures, a shared laugh, a glance, a hand resting on the table, were magnified into headlines. But the noise outside wasn't the only battle. Inside, Sandra struggled with doubt. Every time she opened her phone, she saw strangers dissecting her life as if it were a performance. She felt like she was losing control of her own story. One evening, she called Keanu. Her voice was shaking. "I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm drowning in opinions, and I don't even know what's true anymore." Keanu listened in silence. When she finished, he said softly, "Meet me tomorrow morning. I want to show you something." The next day, Sandra drove to the address he sent. It wasn't a fancy restaurant or a private estate. It was a small community center in a quiet neighborhood. She found Keanu in the back garden, kneeling beside a group of children planting flowers. "You brought me here?" she asked, surprised. He stood, brushing dirt from his hands. "This is where I go when the world gets too loud. Here, nobody cares about the noise. They only care about the kindness you bring." Sandra watched as the children laughed and handed him small pots of soil. Her heart softened at the sight. He wasn't Keanu Reeves, the movie star here. He was just a man helping kids build something beautiful out of the earth. One little girl tugged at Sandra's sleeve. "Will you help us too?" she asked, holding out a small flower. Sandra hesitated, then knelt down, placing the flower in the soil with the girl. For the first time in days, she smiled without effort. Later, as the children ran inside for snacks, Sandra turned to Keanu. "You really think this can silence the world?" He shook his head gently. "Not silence. But it reminds me that the world is bigger than the noise. When you focus on the good you can do, the rest doesn't feel so heavy." His words stayed with her. And for a while, they worked together at the center, helping with small tasks, talking with volunteers, laughing with children. The world outside seemed distant, less powerful, but the peace didn't last long. When they left the center, they were met by a wall of reporters at the gate. Microphones pushed toward them, voices shouting over one another. "Sandra, are you and Keanu in love? Keanu, why are you hiding the truth? Is this just another Hollywood story?" Flashes blinded Sandra. Her chest tightened. She could barely breathe. Then something unexpected happened. One of the children from the center ran out, holding the flower she had planted. The boy shouted, "Leave them alone! They were helping us!" The reporters froze for a moment, stunned. Cameras captured the child's voice echoing in the chaos, and suddenly the story changed. Photos of Keanu and Sandra helping children flooded the internet. Instead of scandal, people saw kindness. Instead of rumors, they saw humanity. But with the new attention came another wave of pressure. Producers called Sandra, warning her that the media frenzy could harm her career. Keanu received messages too, urging him to stay silent or distance himself. That night, Sandra sat with Keanu in her living room, her face pale with worry. What if this ruins everything we've built? Our careers, our peace, even our friendship? Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady. Then maybe it's time we stop living for what we could lose and start living for what we can give. His words hit her like thunder. They weren't just about surviving anymore. They were about choosing a different kind of life, one led not by fear but by courage. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. And if the world never accepts that? Keanu reached out, gently wiping her tears once again, just as he had the first night. Then we accept each other. And maybe that's enough. In that moment, Sandra realized something powerful. The storms around them would never truly stop. But storms, no matter how fierce, could not erase the truth of two people choosing kindness, respect, and resilience in a world built on noise. Still, a shadow lingered in her heart. She couldn't ignore it. Storms often grow darkest before they fade, and she wondered what final test was still waiting for them. The final test came sooner than either of them expected. A major film studio had just announced Sandra as the lead for a new project. It was supposed to be her return to the big screen after months of stepping away. But before she could even celebrate, the press twisted the announcement, claiming her role was only possible because of Keanu's influence. The story spread like wildfire. Interviews, gossip columns, and endless online chatter painted her as dependent, as someone who needed saving. It broke her. She hadn't cried like that in years, but this time the tears weren't from loneliness. They were from anger, from injustice, from the cruel thought that her hard work had been erased in one careless rumor. She called Keanu late at night. Her voice was shattered. "They've taken everything I've worked for and turned it into a joke. I feel like I don't exist anymore. Just his shadow." Silence stretched on the other end, but Keanu wasn't absent. He was breathing carefully, choosing every word. Finally, he said, "Meet me tomorrow. Don't ask why, just come." The next day, she found herself walking into a quiet theater. It was empty except for Keanu, standing on stage, under a single light. He gestured for her to sit in the front row. "You once asked me," he began, his voice steady but filled with emotion, "why I keep showing up for you. I never gave you the full answer." Sandra's eyes locked on him, her heart racing. "I show up," he continued, "because you've been showing up for the world for years, in every role, in every person you've lifted, in every smile you've given when your own heart was breaking. You don't stand in my shadow. If anything, I've been standing in yours, and I'm grateful." Her breath caught in her chest. Tears spilled again, but these were different, tears that broke walls instead of building them. Keanu stepped closer, his voice softer now. "Let the world say what it wants. They'll always write their headlines, but headlines fade. Kindness doesn't. Respect doesn't. What we've shared, what we've carried for each other, that's real. And real doesn't need permission to exist." The theater was silent, except for her quiet sobs. She stood walking toward him slowly, her hands trembling. When she reached him, he did what he had done from the very beginning. He wiped her tears with a gentle touch, his eyes never leaving hers. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "No, we saved each other." For a long moment they stood together on that stage, two people who had been torn apart by noise but brought back together by something stronger than fame, stronger than pain, something built on respect, humility, and the simple courage to keep showing up. In the weeks that followed, the storm outside didn't disappear, but it lost its power. The headlines faded into the background, replaced by a story people couldn't stop talking about. Not scandal, not rumor, but the way Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock reminded the world that kindness is not weakness, and vulnerability is not shame. Sandra returned to her work with renewed strength. Keanu continued his quiet life of compassion. And though neither of them ever confirmed or denied the world's endless questions, the truth was written in the way they looked at each other, the way they showed up for one another when it mattered most. Because sometimes the greatest love stories aren't about grand confessions or dramatic endings. Sometimes they are about two people choosing, again and again, to stand beside each other when the world turns its back, and long after the cameras left, long after the noise quieted, the memory of a single act remained. The night when Keanu Reeves wiped Sandra Bullock's tears. And the internet couldn't stop talking, not because of scandal, but because the world had been reminded of the quiet power of kindness.